אז אנחנו נמשיך אל ההרצאה האחרונה שחותמת את המושב הזה.
מתכבדת להזמין את רפאל נובק, סטודנט בתוכנית לימודי רפואה בינלאומית באוניברסיטת בן גוריון. רפאל מתעניין בלימודי שואה זמן רב וקיבל השראה לכך מסבתו שנהגה להתנדב בארגוני סיוע לניצולי שואה. רפאל יציג מחקר שביצע ביחד עם דוקטור מתי פוקס על ביוגרפיה של הרופא הנאצי, דוקטור פרידריך ברנר, נושא הרצאתו. מסע קריירה טרנספורמטיבי של רופא נאצי ממצוינות אקדמית לרצחנות רפואית. מאחר מדבר באנגלית, אז אני גם אתן את ההקדמה הזו באנגלית. רפאל נובק is a medical student at the Ben Gurion University in Be'er Sheva, currently completing his second year of a 4-year program at the Ben Gurion University Medical School for International Health. Rafael has had a long time interest in studying the Holocaust, receiving much inspiration from his grandmother, who used to volunteer with survivors for many decades. Rafael will be speaking about active research that he and Dr. Matteo Fuchs are doing on the biography of Nazi physician Dr. Friedrich Brenner, who underwent a transformative career journey from academic medicine to medicalized murder in the Nazi regime.
All right, well, thank you very much. I hope that you can see my presentation. Thank you for this opportunity. It's definitely an honor to present our ongoing research on the biography of Dr. Friedrich Brenner. So I'd like to begin by sharing the purpose, which is to recognize and recall the atrocities committed by the Nazi physicians during the Holocaust, all under the guise of medical advancement and also political progress. But more specifically, this biography of Dr. Brenner provides an example of the incremental ethical depravity of medical professionals and the medical field as a whole under the Nazi regime. So I'll begin with this quote from Hitler, where he says, "I could, if need be, do without lawyers, engineers, and builders, but you," referring to the Nazi doctors, "I could not do without you for a single day, not a single hour, and if you fail me, then all is lost." So this really shows the immense power and responsibility put on the Nazi physicians to accomplish the goals of the Nazi regime. So I'll begin with a few facts on Dr. Brenner's biography. He was born in 1904 in Germany and graduated from medical school in 1931. He was very career-focused, and you can see this throughout his life as well, that he really aspired to become a professional in the field of medicine, specifically in radiology. He eventually became the senior physician at the Central Radiology Institute in Mainz in 1935, and ultimately became vice chairman to Dr. Hohlfelder, we'll come back to that name, at the University of Frankfurt in 1937. Aside from his academic pursuits, he was also very involved in the SS, in the military, Nazi military, and specifically there, he was initially involved with conducting chest x-rays to detect tuberculosis infections. And also in the SS, he worked under the leadership of Dr. Hans Hohlfelder, who was also his supervisor academically. So a few words on tuberculosis. In 1935, tuberculosis in Europe was the #1 communicable disease and the second highest leading cause of death. The Reich physicians' leadership, cooperating with the German X-ray or Röntgen Society and also major technology industries such as Siemens, collaborated to accomplish something called Volksgesundheit or national health, which was to be accomplished by doing mass tuberculosis screening using X-ray technology. And this led to something called the Volksröntgenkataster, or the People's Röntgen Register. At the time, TB was viewed as a genotoxin, something that decreased the quality of the Aryan genotype. And it's important to stress that the goal of detection was not for healing, but for lethal social reform measures. Dr. Hans Hohlfelder, who was, again, Dr. Berner's supervisor, and they worked very closely together, developed a mobile series imager with the assistance of Dr. Aproy from Argentina. And this new technique was called photofluorography. So I'll share just a few facts about that. Also sometimes referred to as mass miniature radiography, and basically consisted of a machine that emitted an X-ray beam that was radiated onto a screen that would fluoresce in real time. And this image that was fluorescing was then captured with a regular film camera. So this technique was much cheaper, more efficient, and could be used to perform mass serial X-ray imaging. Hans Hohlfelder learned this technique and further developed with Siemens also a mobile version that could be used on purpose-built buses. And this became what is called the SS Röntgensturmbahn, or the mobile X-ray unit. Here are just a few pictures of that. The SS mobile X-ray unit operated from 1938 to 1944. And initially, one example during the Nuremberg rally in 38, it was proven that over 10,000 images could be taken of SS personnel within 6 days, and about 1% were found to be suspicious for active tuberculosis. And it was Dr. Friedrich Berner who was appointed deputy commander of this Röntgensturmbahn in 1938, and he was also instrumental in evaluating the images, and he also helped refine this serial imaging technique. So a few points about the genotoxin as it was referred to under the Nazi regime. First of all, during the Weimar Republic before the war, the primary goal of tuberculosis imaging was to implement protection while still respecting the rights of the public. But under the Nazi regime, this was the last priority, and we see completely the opposite happening. The primary goal was to combat an inferior genetic makeup, and there was no consideration of treatment following positive identification of tuberculosis. These mobile units also extended into occupied territory, and there's an example of over 230,000 Polish people that were screened and identified with TB, and their fates were negotiated by individuals such as Heinrich Himmler, who committed great atrocities during the Shoah. So the outcome of these people was varied. Many underwent sterilization, many were forced into institutions where they were branded or labeled as asocial or deviant tuberculosis patients. And this was used as an excuse basically to get rid of them because they posed a threat to the Aryan genotype. A euphemism for the treatment that they received in these detention centers was often referred to as special treatment. So here's just a picture that shows also police orders that went out as part of this mandatory tuberculosis screening. And it was based on a racial hierarchy. You can see this one is written in German and Polish. The German public health officials viewed the Polish people as half civilized people that were incapable of self-hygiene. And they used this as an excuse to basically press their public health measures, their racist public health measures on this population. I'll just very briefly mention this because it's a whole separate topic in of itself, but sterilizations were also performed by medical professionals during this time, over 300,000 individuals. These sterilizations were done surgically, but also through radiation. And there were over 150, there were 150 radiologists that we have record of that were licensed to perform sterilizations by radiation. And I'll come back to mentioning significance of this shortly. So now focusing a bit more on Dr. Berner's academic career. Between 1932 and 39, he published 24 papers in radiology, and Dr. Berner and his supervisor also published the first Atlas of the X-ray serial screen images textbook in 1939, which was based on the evaluation of over 900,000 X-ray images. This was a very significant piece of work. Also, we were able to get our hands on Dr. Berner's thesis, his postdoctoral thesis, which he completed in 1940. which aimed to determine the necessary radiation doses needed to destroy cells in a short amount of time. Now, reviewing his thesis, it appears as that the main focus of his thesis was a discussion on the physics and discussion of the proper levels of radiation needed mainly for oncology purposes. But it's important to note that Dr. Hohlfelder, who was Dr. Berner's supervisor, happened to be one of the 150 sterilization licensed radiologists. So at this point, it's unclear, though possible, that Dr. Berner also participated in these sterilizations because they shared many similar ideological values. So here, going into a bit of the atlas, which was formally titled The Atlas of the X-ray Serial Images of the Chest, that was based on over 900,000 X-ray serial screen images. So this was the outcome of mass TB screening in conjunction with the Röntgensturmbahn in Mecklenburg, where over 650,000 people were screened within 4 months. And this atlas, which we were able to get our hands on through the kind assistance of Dr. Gabriele Moser from the University of Heidelberg in Germany, really shows some superior work, and it created an invaluable repository of X-ray images that could be used to compare and contrast various thorax pathologies, both pulmonary, also cardiology, and also focusing specifically on tuberculosis. This also proved the concept which could be used as an epidemic hygienic passport control. And this atlas also goes into discussing benefits and limitations of the use of this new technique of X-ray photofluorography. So this is just a few pictures from the inside of the atlas. And most significant to note here is this quote from Adolf Hitler, a quote from his Mein Kampf, which appears on the introduction in Dr. Berner's atlas. And this quote is really telling, and it shows much about their ideological viewpoints. And it makes comparison between treatment of the Black Plague and syphilis and tuberculosis. And you can see this shift between combating disease to creating terror against sick people under the nationalist socialism regime, where these sick individuals were seen as a burden or being inferior, and therefore them needing to be eliminated. So rather than being seen as human beings that needed care and treatment, they were regarded as disease carriers who were a constant threat to healthy people. So the fight against TB became a fight against the people of tuberculosis. Eventually, Dr. Berner, near the beginning of the war, he was directed to one of the 6 secret Nazi T4 euthanasia program facilities, namely Hadamar. There were 6 such institutions that murdered over 70,000 mentally and physically disabled patients by gassing or lethal overdoses. All of these operations in these secret euthanasia programs were carried out by medical professionals, by physicians, by nurses. And it is estimated that under Dr. Berner's watch between May and December, he oversaw at least 4,100 killings at Hadamar. And there's a record of him ordering all of his staff, all of the nursing and support staff, to take part in a large party, basically a celebration that he held to recognize the 10,000th victim that they had murdered at Hadamar. And this really shows just the grotesque worldview that these people were operating under. Just a quote here from Mein Kampf again, where Hitler says, "Whoever is not bodily and spiritually healthy and worthy shall not have the right to pass on his suffering in the body of his children." This is what these physicians acted on. Berner was also involved in Buchenwald at the concentration camp there as part of Operation 14F13, which was kind of a hybrid between T4 and the concentration camps, for example, the operations that we saw at Auschwitz, for example. With 14F13, physicians would come on trains to the camps and would return with selected individuals, between 300 to 500 prisoners, back to T4 centers. And these prisoners were deemed too sick to work, and they eventually met their fate in the T4 centers under the auspices of medical professionals. The information about Dr. Bern's life after Hadamar are sparse. We do know that he returned to teach at Frankfurt University Radiology Institute in 1944, and he also continued serving in the Röntgensturmbahn. He is recorded to have fallen in battle on March 2nd, 1945 in occupied Poland. So a few reflections, things that we can learn from the biography of Dr. Berner. First of all, we can see that incrementally depraved ethical choices and compromises can lead to atrocious medical malfeasance. It also shows the immoral worldview of the Nazi regime that turned healers into ruthless murderers, and the role that distinguished individuals and professional medical societies played in these atrocities. The advances in medical knowledge, practice, and equipment used to hurt rather than heal. And it's a reminder also that the field of medicine has incredible power, and that power can be abused, especially if the interests of patients are not held in the highest regard. And also, advances in science and medicine does not necessarily translate into being ethical science and medicine. So just reflecting in summary, we see Dr. Berner, who 8 years after completing medical school, completed a PhD, MD degree. He published a significant resource, the Atlas, that was used by radiologists and medical professionals. He published 24 papers in radiology, and he also became the vice chairman of the radiology department. Now, this all shows us a young, highly successful academic, but it also shows us the transformation, the dangerous transformation that can occur in light of this. And we see him becoming compliant in unethical activities, including making selections that were not for the purpose of treatment, but rather selections for the screening and selections not for the purpose of prevention, but ultimately for murder, and him going as far as directly committing murder. So thank you for listening to my presentation, and I'll pass it back. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafael, for your impressive and interesting lecture and work.